So I'm going to just get started. I'm John Hagel. I run a research center in Silicon Valley called the Center for the Edge. It's part of Deloitte, a very large consulting firm. What I want to do today is share with you some of the work that we've done, some of the research we've been doing around workplace redesign. I need to start, though, with an apology, which is that I have absolutely no PowerPoint slides to share with you today. So I know it's probably a huge disappointment, and certainly understand if you want to leave and catch up on email or something else. Be productive during this time. But as the title of my and I should mention also, if you're following on Twitter, want to post on Twitter, my handle is jhagel, J-H-A-G-E-L. What I want to do is start with a paradox. And I love paradox. I think paradox is ultimately the source of all new insight and knowledge. The title of my research center, the Center for the Edge, is in itself a bit of a paradox. How can you have a center for the edge? It just doesn't make sense. The paradox that I want to focus on in this talk is something that I call the Dilbert paradox. And the Dilbert paradox goes like this. If you go to any senior executive of any company these days and ask them what their top priorities are, without exception, from my experience, the executive will reply, if not the top priority, it's certainly in the top three, talent. We're in a war for talent. This is our most important priority. We need to get talent and hold on to it. So take that as one data point. The other data point is then how do you explain the enormous popular success of these cultural artifacts like The Office and Dilbert that so graphically demonstrate the absolutely stultifying effect of our work environments on talent? So are the executives being dishonest? Are they not sincere when they say talent's their top priority? I think they're actually quite sincere. I think they all understand that talent is absolutely critical to success in an increasingly competitive business environment. On the other side, is it that The Office and Dilbert are just fantasies and have no bearing on the reality of our day-to-day work environment? No, I actually think that part of their enormous appeal is they so accurately capture the experience of so many workers in their day-to-day work environment. So how do you resolve this paradox? I mean, these are two contradictory points. If talent's the top priority, why are the work environments so terrible? I think the way to resolve it is to take it one step further in talking to executives and ask, well, what are you doing about talent? If talent is such a high priority, what are the initiatives? What are you focused on in terms of talent? And again, I'll oversimplify, but from my experience, most executives will answer with two things, two top priorities in terms of talent. One is attracting talent, attracting world-class talent. We're focused on recruiting at the best schools. We're focused on finding the best companies to pull executives and other people out of and into our company. We spend a lot of time and effort on attracting talent, world-class talent. And then on the other side, the other big priority is retaining talent. We'll do everything we can. If we see any evidence of dissatisfaction or frustration, we can put together the best retention package and we'll hold on to that talent. The problem with framing it that way is there's a missing middle in here. So you attract the talent, and then maybe you have an issue around retaining the talent. What are you doing while you have the talent? What's going on there? And so I'll introduce the question of, well, what about talent development? What about developing that talent you have while you have it? And the executive will say, oh, yeah, that's right, talent development, sure, that's important. Yeah, we have training programs. You know, it's all about which part of the career, at what point in the career do we want people to go to which programs, and what should the curriculum be, and who should be in those programs. It's all about training programs. Well, I want to suggest, and this was the catalyst for the work we did, the research around workplace redesign, with the somewhat provocative proposition, I think for many, that training programs are becoming more and more marginal to talent development, that they're less relevant in a rapidly changing world. The most important, the most powerful talent development doesn't occur in a training room. It occurs day to day, on the job, in the work environment. And that I find is generally an aha moment for a lot of executives. They haven't really thought about it in those terms. And the question I think that's really interesting is, we over decades now have developed an incredible body of knowledge and thinking around design methodologies, design thinking. We've applied it to our products. We've made much better, much more engaging, powerful products for customers using design thinking and design methodologies. We've applied it to the customer experience. How would you design the customer experience to give them more value so that they derive more value from the products and services they're using? Really powerful results. What's interesting to us as we started this research project was we couldn't find any real effort to apply that same design thinking and methodology to ourselves. Fine, work with the customer, create great customer experiences. What about creating great work experiences for the employees, for the people within our companies? That's something that we found is still a very open kind of territory. And particularly if you think about design methodologies in looking at the work environment holistically. There are lots of examples. I think one of the big things right now is, in terms of workplace redesign, is configuration of offices, configuration of desks in offices, all of the physical aspects of the work environment. And that's important, but that's just one piece of the work environment. Increasingly, in this connected world that we have, a big part of the work environment is the virtual platforms and the virtual systems and tools that we interact with on a daily basis in our work environments. What about those? And what about the management systems, the compensation systems, the incentive systems, everything that we interact with, again, on a day-to-day basis in our work environment? What if we took a holistic view of the work environment, rather than just taking slices, physical or virtual or management systems? What if we took it as an integrated whole and said, what would the work environment look like if our primary goal were to accelerate learning and talent development in the work environment? We think that's a very interesting and powerful question. And by the way, I would also urge that as we think about work environments, there's a tendency, at least in the conversations I have with executives, that the work environment is basically within the four walls of our company. And maybe we'll extend it out to the home if employees who are working at home. But what about people who are not part of our employee base? What about third parties? I'm a big fan. One of my favorite quotes, I use it all the time, is from Bill Joy, founder of Sun Microsystems. And he had a great statement one day. He said, no matter how many smart people you have within your organization, just remember one thing. There are a lot more smart people outside your organization than inside it. And so if you're serious about learning and talent development, the question becomes, how can you more effectively connect with the relevant smart people wherever they are? Not necessarily your employees. Maybe they're part of your broader ecosystem. Maybe you've never connected with them at all. How can you redesign work environments to more effectively connect the relevant smart people so that they can learn faster together? So again, expanding the thinking around what is a work environment, what is a workplace. Now the challenge, obviously, is that work environments differ dramatically. If you're talking about a research lab on the one side, if you're talking about an assembly line operation in a factory on another side, a remote sales office, people who are working at home, the work environments differ dramatically. So despite our best efforts, we haven't been able to come up with the perfect work environment. Here's the map of the work environment. But what we think is possible, and where we focused our effort, was in really trying to understand what are the design principles that you could use and the design goals to drive those principles in whatever work environment we're talking about. That, we think, is a powerful way to start to rethink the work environment and redesign the work environment. So we've spent a lot of time focusing on, at the end of the day, we ended up identifying 3 design goals. And I should say, by the way, there is a working paper that captures all of what I'm sharing with you in much more detail. So if you're interested, certainly can share that with you as well. But we ended up identifying 3 design goals that ultimately we think will drive work environments that accelerate learning and talent development. And the first goal has to do with the notion of helping employees or the people that are in the work environment to more effectively understand the challenges, the performance challenges that are highest impact to the organization. I think we often take for granted that everybody has a sense of what really matters in the company or the organization. And that's generally not true. Most people are very narrowly siloed into one particular part of the organization. They have a pretty clear idea of what their work is and maybe what their performance impact might be, but they have no idea what the broader performance issues are for the company. So how do you help them to get a better visibility into what really matters and where they can potentially make a contribution to driving performance improvement and in the process learning and develop their own talent as well? In this context, for that design goal around focusing on performance challenges, there are a lot of interesting examples. And part of the work we did, we ended up doing about 75 case studies of companies that had taken different slices at workplace redesign. Again, we couldn't find any company that has holistically taken this on and said, let's apply design methodologies to the work environment as a whole. But we could find a lot of interesting slices, examples of particular dimensions of the work environment that were redesigned. And one of them that I think is interesting is a company called LiveOps. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a company that basically does outsourced call center operations for larger companies. They run call centers for large companies that have outsourced it. The really interesting part about the company is they have no call centers. All their workers, and they have 20,000 workers, so it's a reasonably large workforce, all their workers work from home. And they've targeted portions of the labor force that, for whatever reason, have a hard time going into a central work facility. You know, parents with small children, people who are taking care of older people, caretakers, younger people who are going to college and doing this on a spare, as an outside job. So they have 20,000 people, highly distributed, who rarely see each other, if ever. I mean, sometimes they'll have local meetups in particular cities, but they rarely see each other. And so the question for them was, how do we create a work environment that's going to help these people to learn faster, to develop their talent more rapidly? And what they focused on was, first of all, they took inspiration from actually World of Warcraft. For those of you who are familiar with the game, one of the key elements in the game is the notion of personalized performance dashboards. On a real-time basis, you know in the game how you're doing on whatever dimensions of performance are important to you. Huge value in terms of figuring out how to play that game and achieve more in the game. So, interesting implementation. They put this personalized performance dashboard out to all their 20,000 workers. In real time, every one of those workers know how they're doing on multiple dimensions of performance. That's interesting. You know, I've been around in IT for decades, and one of the great areas of IT has been the whole notion of business intelligence. But when I probe into business intelligence, the focus is on how do we get more data and information to the senior executives or maybe to the middle managers so they have more visibility into what's going on in the company. The idea of actually taking that information and delivering it back to the frontline workers and giving them a rich, real-time view of their performance, that's new. That hasn't really occurred to most companies. But again, with LiveOps, they created these personalized performance dashboards delivered on the computer screen. But they went one step further, because my instinct is that if companies actually implemented this notion of personalized dashboards, most companies would approach it as a tool for punishment, right? You're falling behind. You're low on this particular metric. You have 3 months. You know, either figure out how to get better or get out of here. But what LiveOps has done is something quite different. They've gone out and said, okay, now we've got real-time feedback to the workers. They know where their performance, where they're ahead of the game in terms of performance and where they're falling behind. Let's create a whole set of virtual environments, discussion forums, communities, where these workers can connect with each other and ask for help. You know, I'm having trouble with this particular kind of call. I can't seem to get the right level of satisfaction in the customer. What could I be doing better? And seeking advice and counsel. And what's interesting in LiveOps' case is the other workers at LiveOps who contribute suggestions, who start coaching the other workers, get rewarded and recognized for having done that. That's a plus on their side. And so it gives real motivation for this peer-to-peer learning within the workforce, within this highly distributed workforce. Very different approach to learning and performance improvement on the job in the day-to-day environment. But we think having huge power and potential for companies more broadly to think about how can we help workers get a better sense, more real-time, richer sense of how they're doing, where their performance is, and then create environments and tools for them to learn faster on the job by connecting with each other, learning from each other. There's another example of a company in this whole area of focusing on performance challenges and helping people to address performance challenges, which is what Intuit has done in the software business. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Intuit. What they've done is create a very interesting set of experimentation platforms for their employees. They broadly introduced it under the rubric of design for delight. But the whole notion was helping everybody in the workforce to experiment in a low-risk, low-cost way, try new things. See what can work and what's not working. How do you refine it over time, rapidly iterate on it? Excuse me. And so accelerate learning through experimentation. For most of us in our work environments, experimentation is a real bear. It's very hard to do. And you do it maybe in isolated cases, but on a day-to-day basis, experimenting to learn faster, to figure out new techniques, new practices that can drive performance to the next level, that's a very interesting alternative approach. So this whole notion of experimentation platforms that can help people to learn faster is another element in work environment redesign around helping people to focus on challenges and address the challenges in a way that's more effective and helps them to learn faster. So that's one principle, is this whole notion of focusing on high-impact performance challenges. How would you redesign work environment to help workers, first of all, see what the most relevant performance challenges are, and then more effectively address them over time? There's a second design goal, which is a notion of helping workers to connect with each other more effectively, high-impact connections. As you're trying to address these performance challenges, how do you connect with others more effectively that are relevant to your particular learning issues or needs? And again, this is an area, one of the broader themes in our work at the Center for the Edge is the notion that increasingly in business, we're moving from a world of knowledge stocks to a world of knowledge flows. Where in the past, success in business was all about coming up with some proprietary knowledge, protecting it aggressively, making sure nobody else had access to it, and then efficiently extracting the value of that knowledge and delivering it to the marketplace. Huge wealth created, huge companies generated from that knowledge stock model. The challenge in a more rapidly changing world is that any knowledge stocks that we have are a depreciating asset. They become obsolete at an accelerating rate. So if all you're doing is focusing on the knowledge stocks you already have, you're protecting a depreciating asset. In that kind of environment, the real challenge and opportunity is how to connect more effectively into relevant knowledge flows so that you can learn faster and refresh those knowledge stocks at a more rapid pace than anybody else. That's ultimately the new formula for success. And for most companies, this is a huge challenge to move from one to the other. But going back to the whole issue of workplace redesign, we think one of the key elements in workplace redesign, one of the key design goals, has got to be if flow is what matters. How do you connect people more effectively and generate those kinds of knowledge flows? So there are examples of this. One of the examples that we came across was what SAP, the software company, has done. In terms of, initially, they developed this platform for software developers who were working on their software but developing applications on top of it. And they recognized that they had a very large ecosystem of third parties, application developers in third parties that were working with customers, and application developers within their large enterprise customers who were all trying to develop these applications. Again, highly distributed people all around the world. And the issue for SAP is how do we more effectively help to connect these people together around things that matter to them. And so what they created initially was this platform that is SAP Community Network, which basically in the early days was just about if you're running into a problem writing some code, here's a place where you can post the problem. Just see if anybody else has an answer. And they weren't looking for somebody to spend a week trying to figure out the answer. The answer typically came from somebody else who said, yeah, 6 months ago I was in a similar situation. Here's how I addressed that problem. Maybe it can work for you. So very low effort to participate, both on the part of the person presenting the problem and on the part of the people presenting solutions to the problem. Interesting, over time, this has grown to a huge scale. It now has over 2 million participants worldwide and continuing to grow rapidly. And what was interesting was that now, the last time I checked, if you post a problem on this platform, it's roughly 17 minutes before you get a solution. Not just an answer, but a solution that you certify, yeah, that solved my problem. So it's a huge productivity driver and helping people to learn faster. They're running into problems they don't know how to solve. They're connecting with each other around the problems and coming up with new insights. But what was really interesting, and this is around the whole notion of connecting, is that SAP went one step further. They created a reputation profile for those who posed answers to the problems. They would get points, they would get recognition for having solved the problem, but they would also get recognition within particular domains of expertise. So they would say, based on the solution you provided this problem, you have some expertise in this particular type of software development, application development. So what was happening over time was that people were developing very rich profiles, reputation profiles of their expertise. And it was really different from the typical approach in knowledge management systems. I know we've all had the experience of being asked by our company to go in and fill out this profile of who we are and what our areas of expertise are. And then, by the way, you ought to keep it up over time. Don't let it go out of date. So it's all about what you claim your expertise is, not necessarily what your real expertise is. And what these reputation profiles for SAP did was actually create a tool where you were accumulating demonstrated expertise. Not expertise you claimed you had, but that you demonstrated through solving problems for other people. And it became a very powerful magnet for people to start to connect with each other around the world. Based on these reputation profiles, they would see, there's somebody over here who has a really interesting set of expertise. I'd like to start a conversation with them. And rather than just posing a problem, a transaction kind of interaction, relationships started to build around these reputation profiles. And then over time, these people started to connect with each other in more sustained ways around forming teams to develop entirely new applications. So a very rich environment emerging over time, helping people to connect with each other. And again, what was really interesting about this was not just focused on the employees within SAP's four walls. This was focused on anybody who is interacting with SAP's software in terms of application development and connecting with a lot of smart people around the world that helped the SAP developers to get better faster, but also helped all these other people to get better faster. So a very powerful engine for accelerated learning and performance improvement that extended across a very broad global ecosystem. So that's one form of connection. If you're thinking about work environment redesign, workplace redesign, how can you help people connect more effectively when they're seeking out answers? There's another kind of connection which is a little harder, more interesting perhaps to focus on, is the whole notion of serendipity. You know, most of us don't know who to look for or who to ask in terms of the problems we're wrestling with. And we've all had that experience of running into somebody completely unexpectedly in an unexpected environment, and we start up a conversation and we start sharing a problem that we have, and all of a sudden this other person from a completely different area has an interesting kind of idea or insight. Says, wow, that was really helpful. It gave me a way to tackle this problem that I hadn't thought about. Now, we all tend to think about serendipity as pure luck. You know, it happens when it happens, and the best you can do, as Louis Pasteur said, was be prepared for it when it does happen, so take advantage of it when it occurs. But how can you shape serendipity? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us as individuals to shape serendipity, but specifically in the context of workplace redesign. How can we redesign the work environment to enhance serendipity, to shape serendipity, to increase the probability and the quality of those unexpected encounters? One great example of this is in the early days of Pixar. Many of you will recall that Steve Jobs was the head of Pixar for a number of years, and in typical Steve Jobs fashion, he micromanaged everything. And one of the things he did was they were designing a new headquarters facility for their company. And he was very thoughtful about designing things. First of all, he said, we're going to put all the food facilities in the center of the building. So no matter where you are, and the restrooms, by the way, in the center of the facility, so no matter where you are throughout the facility, you got to come together in these central areas to do some important things. Second of all, he understaffed the food facilities. So there were long lines to get food. And standing in line, what do? Well, you strike up a conversation with the person either in front of you or behind you, and God knows what happens in those conversations. And then he also designed it so the tables, when you got your food, there were no tables for 2 or tables for 4. There were these long picnic-style tables where people had to sit together. And conversations came up and serendipity occurred. But very interesting, thoughtful approach to how do you enhance that potential for serendipity. If flow is what matters, and you can't always reach out to the appropriate person, how do you create environments where you can connect with people that potentially can be very helpful to you? So, second design goal is helping people to connect more effectively, helping the employees and the broader ecosystem to connect more effectively, to learn faster and drive performance improvement. The third element is a general notion of how do you amplify impact. This has to do with things like infrastructures and platforms that can help magnify the impact of both these challenges and the connections that people are establishing, so you get even more performance improvement, more learning from those results. And there's a very, very diverse set of techniques and approaches that are being used in this environment. One of them has to do, and I'll go back to the SAP example, what SAP's done with this community network that they've established is they capture and organize all the questions and answers that have been posed on the network. So if you're going in, your first stop is not necessarily to pose the question again, but it's to see if the question has already been posed. So it's a whole notion of smart capture. You know, and again, the contrast for me is relative to traditional knowledge management systems, where we're all asked to, whatever documents we have, whatever memos we have, to post them, put them into a central repository, and hopefully somebody organizes them in a way that they're accessible. But it's a real effort to have to post all this stuff. What goes on in this SAP network is they're only posting the initial problem and then the answer. And then it's captured and organized by the system to make it more accessible to people in the future. So it eliminates that step of having to think about, okay, what did I do? Should I post it or not? And how do I present it so that it's helpful for others? So a very different approach in terms of smart capture of knowledge and the interactions that people have. So 3 design goals here. One is this whole notion of how do you create an environment that focuses people on the highest impact challenges. Second design goal is how do you help people connect in higher impact ways so that they can address those challenges more effectively and learn faster. And then what kinds of infrastructures and systems can you put in place for that third design goal to amplify the impact of all those interactions and challenges. I think bottom line, what we're suggesting here is that we've kind of flipped the notion that most executives have around talent development and learning, which if you go back to this whole notion, it's about training programs. Well, if you take a training program view of learning and talent development, it's got some challenges attached to it. You have to spend money up front. You have to pull people out of their jobs for a period of time to go to the training programs. And then maybe sometime, somewhere down the line, they'll actually deliver some performance improvement to the organization to justify that spend. This model around workplace redesign kind of flips that around and says, no, focus on performance improvement. Focus people on the performance impact that they can have and help them connect in ways where they're going to drive performance improvement. And as a byproduct, they're going to end up learning and developing their own talent. So now it's a much more powerful proposition. I get the performance improvement up front, and as a great byproduct, I'm developing my talent at a more rapid rate than anybody else is. So it's a very different kind of mindset and approach that, again, we think in a world of increasing pressure is a very appealing one. I want to quickly just go on what may seem like a tangent, but hopefully I can justify why it's not, which is one of the things that was very influential to us in terms of thinking about these design goals and stepping back from all the specific individual case studies we had of interesting initiatives, and why we ended up focusing on those 3 design goals, is we ended up with a point of view through other research that we've done that if you're really serious about learning and talent development and performance improvement, there's one critical ingredient, and it's not in it's not in the work environment itself, work environment context. It's in the people, and it has to do with passion. That unless the people in the organization and that you're interacting with have real passion, they're not going to learn as fast and drive performance improvement as rapidly as somebody who does have passion. So we came to this actually by looking at environments. We said, let's just go out and see where we can find sustained extreme performance improvement. Companies in general are having a sense that performance improvement is more and more urgent. And so we wanted to find sustained extreme performance improvement. And we went far afield from traditional business environments. We spent a lot of time with extreme sports. Big wave surfing, extreme skiing, any sports arena where they're pushing the boundaries of performance and doing it in a sustained way. And we also ended up looking at a whole range of online video game environments, places like World of Warcraft, where there is huge pressure to drive your performance to the next level, and where the price of not driving your performance to the next level is usually you die. At least virtually. And so there is a strong motivation to learn faster and improve performance. And one of the things we found, despite the diversity of all these different environments and arenas, the one common element we saw in all those arenas of sustained extreme performance improvement was passion. The passion of all the participants. Now, I use passion somewhat with some reservation because we all use the word very loosely, and from my experience, we all have somewhat different meanings attached to what passion is. The focus we have, what we ended up doing was looking at the type of passion we saw in these environments, and we ended up calling it the passion of the explorer. And it's one type of passion. There are many other types. But this one type of passion has 3 components to it that we think helps to explain the accelerated learning and performance improvement. The first is a long-term commitment to a domain. A passionate explorer is in this for the long term. They're not just kind of visiting to see what's going on. They are committed. And they're committed not just to a domain and learning about the domain, but they're committed to making a contribution, a difference in that domain. And not just one contribution or difference, but an escalating set of contributions over time. So a long-term commitment to a domain. There's a second element, which is a notion of what we call a questing disposition. These people in these environments actively seek out the next challenge, the next quest, because they see it as an opportunity to test themselves, to figure out how to get to that next level of performance. So they're not just waiting for challenges to come to them, they're actively seeking them out. And then the third element is what we call a connecting disposition. The passionate explorers, when they're confronted with these challenges, for many of us, when we're confronted with a challenge, our instinct is to go off into a corner somewhere, try to figure it out, and then come back with the answer. The passionate explorers have a different orientation. Their orientation, their immediate instinct when confronting a challenge is, who else can I connect with? Who else out there has relevant expertise or experience or just shares my passion that I could engage to figure this out more quickly and get to that next level more rapidly? So these 3 elements, when they come together, this long-term commitment to a domain, this questing disposition and this connecting disposition create a very interesting intersection that you can see how it would drive more rapid learning and performance improvement if you have these three elements than if you're just there collecting a paycheck or trying to do your job. So this notion of the passion of the explorer, the importance of the passion of the explorer, we think is central in terms of thinking about workplace redesign. And it's not an accident that at least two of our design goals, helping people to focus on high-impact challenges, helping people to connect more effectively, are explicitly designed to draw out those elements of the passion of the explorer, the passionate explorer. The challenge that we have, certainly in the US, and I think it's probably more widespread, we went out and did a survey to actually try to determine if passion of the explorer is so critical to performance improvement and learning, how many of our workers in the US have this passion of the explorer? Well, it turns out, and by the way, we didn't ask, do you have passion? We tried to pull apart the behaviors that define these elements and asked about the behaviors and then derived whether they had this passion of the explorer or not. It turns out that 11% of workers in the US have this passion of the explorer. So 89% do not. So if you're really focused on accelerated learning and talent development, this is a huge problem, a huge challenge. And I should also mention that from our perspective, we would want to make a distinction between engagement and passion. There's a lot of interest in recent years around worker engagement, the importance of worker engagement. And again, I don't want to dismiss that. And the challenge in part is there are lots of different definitions of engagement as well as passion. But broadly, if you pull apart most of the approaches to worker engagement, it's about, do you like the work you're doing? Do you like the people you work with? Do you respect the company you work for? Do you look forward to going to work in the morning? Those are the kinds of measures of worker engagement. It says nothing about commitment to performance improvement. In fact, to be a bit provocative, I would suggest that the engaged workers are often pretty conservative about performance improvement. If they get unexpected challenges, particularly challenges that imply that they're going to have to fundamentally change the work they're doing, why would I do that? I like the work I'm doing. I like the current situation. Forget about it. Versus the passionate explorer whose reaction is, wow, this is an opportunity to take myself to the next level. It's going to take me out of my comfort zone. It may completely redefine the work that I'm doing, but that's exciting. And by the way, I'll also make the observation that from our experience, worker passion does not translate to worker happiness. Often you will find the passionate workers, the workers who have the passion of the explorer, are hugely frustrated, right? They see all the huge opportunities that are available that could be addressed, but all the obstacles that have been put in their place that are preventing them from addressing those challenges, those opportunities. So they're pounding the table saying, come on, let's get it together here. This is crazy. They, I believe, have happiness at another level, but they're not going to say, I'm happy about the work I'm doing. I'm frustrated. This is crazy. So worker passion, absolutely critical to driving accelerated learning and performance improvement. And tie this back to workplace redesign, because our belief, and we can discuss and challenge this, is that that passion can be drawn out. It can be catalyzed and it can be nurtured and amplified depending on the work environment. And the example I like to use, also the other pushback I get when I talk about passion, in the workforce is, come on, John, let's be real. You know, if you're a research scientist in a research lab or a creative product designer, yeah, you can be passionate about that kind of work, but most work is mundane, routine kind of tasks that get performed day in and day out. It's just unrealistic to expect people to be passionate about that kind of work. Come on, be real. Well, the example I like to use as a counter, and it ties back to this issue of workplace redesign, is what Toyota did in the automobile industry, actually quite a while ago now. But basically what Toyota did was they said, look, they addressed the workers on the front line of their factories, the manual workers in their factories, and they said, look, you know, there are mundane, routine processing tasks that you have to do. This is an assembly line after all. But they said, no, your real job is problem solving. Your job is to identify problems as they occur on the assembly line, and don't wait until after your shift is over to file a problem report. Solve the problem right then and there. And if you can't solve the problem, we're going to put a pull cord next to your station. You pull that cord, and the entire assembly line is going to come to a screeching halt. The factory will shut down. And we're going to swarm you with a team of people to help you solve that problem. And you'll be a hero for having pulled that cord. You found a problem that needed to be solved and helped us to focus on that problem. Passion levels went way up on the front line of the Toyota plants. Now, the response of Detroit was somewhat interesting when they heard about this redefinition of the work environment in the Toyota plants. They said, oh, it's a cultural issue. Those are Japanese workers. You know, maybe they could be passionate about this kind of work, but an American worker? No, not possible. So Toyota came in and bought a plant from a U.S. automobile company in California, implemented this work environment redesign. Guess what? Passion levels went way up on the front line of the workforce. So it gives us a lot of nourishment or reinforcement for the belief that this passion, as important as it is not something that is just isolated and rare, but can be catalyzed, amplified, and nurtured through workplace redesign. If you take the right approach to the workplace, you can draw out this passion in the people that are in the work environment. So, I guess my final comment is just that as we think about this, I want to pull back to some of our broader perspective at the Center for the Edge. You know, there's one way of approaching this, which is to say, wow, this is a really interesting opportunity. And when we have some time and resources, we might actually tackle it, at least in some of our workplaces. I want to really come on hard with the observation, this is not an opportunity. This is an imperative. That in the changing business environment that we have on a global basis, the companies that don't figure this out, and don't figure this out quickly, are going to become increasingly marginalized and ultimately die. And it'll be a real death this time, not a virtual death. That we are in an environment of mounting performance pressure. It's what I call the dark side of this technology that we've created. You know, we all come to South by and showcase the incredible technology and all the opportunities that are available from the technology. There is a dark side to the technology, which is it is, in economic terms, systematically reducing barriers to entry and barriers to movement on a global scale, intensifying competition in a dramatic way that is not going to go away. It's not cyclical. Yes, we have cyclical downturns, but there is a long-term secular mounting performance pressure that we're all going to have to wrestle with. And by the way, it's not just as companies, it's as individuals. One of my favorite billboards that used to be up in Silicon Valley asked a very simple question. The question was, how does it feel to know that there are at least 1 million people around the world who can do your job? Kind of focuses the mind. 1 million? And it wouldn't have been possible. I mean, it would have been an absurd observation or question, 40, 50 years ago. You were protected by geography and distance and all kinds of other things that prevented the competition for your job. Those barriers are all going away. We all, no matter what our credentials, no matter what our accomplishments in the past, if we're not continuing to move faster in learning and performance improvement, there are 1 million people, and there may be more shortly. And by the way, the interesting additional challenge is increasingly there are potentially 1 million robots who can do your job. So, time to focus the mind. I think from a company point of view, this is also a critical imperative. One of the pieces of work we've done is around looking at corporate performance in the U.S., all public companies in the U.S. from 1965 to today, and looking at return on assets as a measure of performance. Over this time period, return on assets has basically collapsed. It's declined by 75%. And there's no sign of it leveling off, no sign of it turning around. This is a long-term secular mounting performance pressure. I am struck by the number of times in executive boardrooms when I hear executives talk about the Red Queen. We're all familiar with that story of the Red Queen who ran faster and faster just to stay in the same place. I make the point that actually the Red Queen had it pretty good. She ran faster and faster and stayed in the same place. We're running faster and faster and falling farther and farther behind. So I think it's an imperative. I don't think it's just an opportunity. This is not a choice. This is something we all have to do if we're going to stay successful in whatever our chosen areas, domains. But on the flip side, I just want to end on a positive note in the sense that I think that the opportunity here is to fundamentally shift the way business performance occurs. I started my career many, many years ago at Boston Consulting Group, BCG, and they had one chart that basically drove a lot of their initial success. It was called the experience curve. And they started by looking at the semiconductor industry and how operating performance improved over time in the semiconductor business, and found that it followed a very, very clear trajectory or path. And over time, they ended up looking at a whole range of other industries and markets to see if that experience curve also applied there. And they went everything from Japanese beer to toilet paper. And my God, the experience curve was a very accurate description of how performance improved in business, in market after market around the world. It was hugely accurate, but it's got a real bad aspect to it, which is it is a diminishing returns curve. The more experience you accumulate in a market or industry, the longer and harder you have to work to get to that next increment of performance improvement. So it explains some of the stress that I think we all experience in an increasingly competitive marketplace. But the opportunity we see with this workplace redesign is to flip this around and for the first time create an increasing returns business environment where the more people who participate, the more rapidly everybody learns, and the more rapidly performance improves. That's a huge opportunity to create unprecedented wealth, and we're looking forward to participating in that. Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. I don't know if that's, yeah.
Just.
John, thanks. Great principles, great examples. I was just, there's a book I had read recently, Phil Van Hoot's book, The Smarter Working Manifesto, and he talks about some of these same trends in terms of talent, space, and technology being key elements. Now, what I'm wondering is, you brought up some of the same things here. How do we bring together the parties that need to collaborate? The leaders need to collaborate in order to bring that holistic change in perspective and drive change throughout the organization, because it seems like those kind of people are all very siloed right now.
It's a great question. I think one of the challenges, and we were puzzled by why we couldn't find any example of a company that had, again, holistically taken on the challenge of work environment redesign. And one of the issues that surfaced as we went about this was, okay, who's accountable for workplace? There is nobody. There's a real estate function in a large company that has the physical facility element of it. There's the IT department that has virtual systems and platforms. There's HR function that have some elements. But nobody has accountability for work environment redesign. How would you develop a work environment that accelerates performance improvement and learning? And so I think the challenge, at least from our perspective, is to find some executives or people in some reasonable level of responsibility in a company who are under great pressure. I think that would be something to look for, who see the need for this performance improvement, or feeling the pain, if you will, and have both the courage and conviction necessary to take this on and say, I'm going to be accountable for this. I'm going to bring together all the relevant parties, and we're going to work this problem together and find a way to drive this performance improvement. But it is a big challenge. Yeah.
I work a lot with federal agencies, and that's a heavily structured and often unionized environment. So what are your thoughts on kind of igniting the passion of the worker in that heavily structured and regulating environment?
You know, at one level, I don't want to diminish the particular challenges of federal government agencies, but I look at most large companies today, and they're tightly structured, and everything is specified down to the nth level of detail, and there's no room for experimentation or risk-taking. And so I think in general, most institutions, I've framed this around companies, but I think most institutions are going to face this challenge. And in my mind, it's ultimately, first of all, about finding these pockets of people who are willing to take some risk and drive some change, and then communicating aggressively the performance improvement, the results. One of the things we found, it was interesting, as we looked at elements of work environment redesign, we could find a lot of cases where people had done interesting things around work environment, but it was a much smaller fraction who had actually taken the time and trouble to benchmark performance pre-work environment redesign and post to say, did it matter? Did it deliver any results, right? And so I think being very focused on how do we quantify the performance impact, because ultimately I think that does help to motivate and mobilize other people to say, wow, they did something that couldn't have been done otherwise. Why don't we try it? It might make life a little bit easier for us as well. So I think it's, yeah. It's not the answer, but it's at least one piece that might make it a little easier to engage. Yeah.
So I apologize for the length of how it's going to take me to actually articulate this question.
Okay, because we've got about 2 minutes.
So, I love your work, and I find it really inspiring. It really takes off on the next level of Peter saying in the FIT discipline. It's just gorgeous stuff. How do you account for taking a holistic idea and then actually going atomistic inside the work environment, given the law of reversed effort paradox that will focus internal learning about what people are doing on a day-to-day basis with their work, will not actually break them out into the humanist lessons that happen outside of work for soft skills to actually make connections real and impactful?
It's an interesting question. I think that my bias in this is that, again, focusing on performance improvement and focusing on the opportunity to redesign work environments, while it may start with more of the hard edge of the kinds of things you can do in the work environment, I think it will quickly become apparent that without those soft skills, those soft edges, you're not going to get the full results from that effort. But framing it in terms of what's the performance improvement objective, what's required to achieve that performance improvement, I think at the end of the day engages executives who may regard the soft stuff as, you know, that's interesting. If I got time someday I'll actually pay attention. But if you can frame it around how is this going to make a difference in the work environment to drive more rapid performance improvement on these particular metrics, my experience is you start to get attention. And then again, you have the further challenge of executives will fall back to the hard stuff that they know and love and can figure out how to apply. They'll give short shrift to the softer emotional stuff, and I think that's where you start to engage around. If you really want knowledge flows, you've got to focus on building relationships among people. Relationships involve more than just, you know, numbers and data. You got to actually engage with the person, and what does that look like? And so that would be my broad answer, but it's a very difficult question. Thank you. I think we're at the limit here. I appreciate you all coming. Thank you very much.